Without any further ado, let's get rolling on our presentation. I want to introduce our first speaker of the day, Secretary Dave Ross.
Good morning. Can everybody hear in back? Did you hear Mr. Gasper? Hey, thumbs up. That's okay.
And I
You did your job. That's okay. Greg is our division administrator. In fact, he was our executive administrator of our agency as well. So he's worn a couple of hats, got a lot of experience throughout our agency, and now he's back in board services. And we couldn't be more proud of what Greg is doing for all of us here, and making sure that one of our largest responsibilities in our agency is board. We have about over 70 boards that meet in our building. We are probably, and I could probably ask Eric Esser here, we're probably the largest agency with appointments that people who come in get appointed by the governor or myself that serve on the different boards and councils in our agency. So we have a lot of broad authority in a lot of different areas. Let me give you a short overview of our agency in general. During Governor Walker's first budget, we merged the Department of Commerce and the Department of Regulation and Licensing together to form this new agency, the Department of Safety and Professional Services. So we do a number of things, all the way from issuing about 250 different license groups in the state of Wisconsin to inspecting fair rides and code enforcement and commercial plan review. We're the OSHA agency for state buildings and employees. We do a whole bunch of odd things, like we regulate mixed martial arts, or MMA, in the state of Wisconsin. That big smackdown in Milwaukee here, we had 22 of our employees managing that event to make sure they follow state laws and regulations in having that kind of. We appoint the boxing commissioner in the state of Wisconsin. So as diverse as we are, we actually touch everything in your life. If you rode in an elevator today, we inspect, regulate, and approve plans for elevators. So a number of diverse responsibilities. But your job, being a member of one of the many boards that we have in our agency, is, first of all, I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for taking the time and volunteering and being on the board. And having in my life, in my 60s now, having been on a lot of boards in my lifetime, I really appreciate the fact that you said yes when you were asked, or agreed to apply to accept a position on our boards. Thank you for service. Thank you for your time. It's a big job. It's a very important job, and it's something we can't do without here in the state of Wisconsin. So thanks for your service. Thanks for taking this day off to come down and be trained. And I know for some of you, I know I was self-employed for over 25 years. When I took a day off, it meant no pay. It meant no compensation. It meant strictly not only giving my time, but giving up income. And for many of you, that is the case as well. So thank you so much. One of the things we constantly hear, and I'm around the state almost every week on the road, and we often hear criticisms of enforcement or policies or decisions that are made by boards or councils, and they'll often state it this way. They'll say, your agency won't let me do this, or your agency is doing this to me. And many times I have to explain the relationship that we have between our agency and your board. Now, we only direct license about 15% of the licenses that we issue. Only about 15% are directly licensed from our agency with no governance by a board or committee. So that's the only license group in which we have direct authority or contact with. Otherwise, most of the licenses that are issued are under some sort of governing board or examining board through our agency. And so in that decision-making process and the authority that you exercise through your board service and the tough decisions that you have to make, especially when it comes to discipline towards the license holder, often we're blamed for that. I'll get an angry call on the phone and say, you know, you took my license, your agency. And I said, no, actually what happened was your peers, your colleagues, those that serve with you in that particular area took that action, and for good reason. And so you hold a lot of authority. Mostly our job as an agency is to staff you and supply you with services and make sure that you have the adequate resources to do your job. And one of the great things about Governor Walker's budget, this agency had a number of financial challenges prior to Governor Walker taking office. And due to the first budget and also due to the second budget that has been passed under this administration, we now are fully funded and have all the resources it takes to do our job. And that's good news. That means if you need to travel, that if you need a number of other resources, you need extra meetings or you need the resources to have those meetings, we have the funds to adequately fund the activities on your board. So what we don't want to hear is we can't do our job because we don't have the resources. I guarantee you, you'll have the resources. We'll give the resources if they're reasonable and needed for you to do your job. We don't want to be tying your hands behind your back, get you all the way through this process, and then have you end up not being able to do your job. So we're looking forward to your service. We're looking forward to what you're doing. And I'm looking at a veteran board member practically in the middle of this room. Now he's smiling because I'm going to pick on him. But Jim Rush, he goes all the way back to the Thompson administration, and then I think he was on with Lewis and Clark, I think your colleague was saying. He was on some committee to settle the West. I don't know what that had to do with back then. But anyways, we have some that have incredible dedicated service to the state and have agreed to stay in their position and serve their profession and do what they've been doing, guys like Jim. And we have many of them that serve on many of our boards. So thank you for your service. We want to help you do your job. We want to adequately give you the resources you need to do your job. And if you have any issues with any of those, this is why we have Greg Gasper. So don't call me, call him. If you want to say nice things, call me. If you want to say really nasty things, call him. I've never seen him get upset once in my life. You'll never be able to raise the temperature on this guy, but I know he'll do his job by making sure that he'll help you in whatever issue that will be. Then the last thing I just want to touch on real quickly is this is a big job. It's a hard job, and you get nothing for it. Just recently, we took a picture, and I wish, Greg, I don't know, is there a slide anywhere in your presentations of Joe standing next to, we have one of our staffers here in the agency, and he's standing next to, this was for the screening activity, med board screening, and the information we send out to the board members, this is literally a stack this high. He put his arm this high. And that has to be reviewed, in this case, by med board members every single month. Before we went electronic with the med board, we would pack them up and send them out parcel post in packages of 15 to 2,000 pages apiece. Multiple packages being delivered to their offices around the state. And the nursing board has another board that has a tremendous load because of the number of license holders that they manage in the state of Wisconsin. Nurses is the largest group of our license holders in the state. It's about 106,000 nurses that we license, about 80,000 RNs and other specialties. So there's a lot of responsibility, there's a lot of work, and go to it, and we thank you for your service. At this time, I get the privilege of introducing somebody I have a profound respect for and a tremendous relationship in the governor's office. Eric Esser is, I'd like to recruit him sometime, but that's a whole other story. Eric Esser does a superb job on behalf of the governor. In fact, I think he has one of the hardest jobs in the governor's office. His job is to make sure that all these board positions all over the state of Wisconsin, throughout all the agencies across state government, and other commissions and boards that are appointed by the governor. He's the one that does the background check, the recruiting, and handholds every single appointee through this process. And I'm going to guess you've done 700 to 1,000? Okay, I'm way behind. He's done 1,500 appointments in the Walker administration since joining this administration. So he's the one that goes into this very tough job of making sure these appointees get here. And you know, not everyone is successful. That's 1,500 successful appointments, and hundreds where sadly they don't pass the test. So at this time, I'd like to introduce somebody I respect profoundly in Governor Walker's office, Eric Esser.
Thank you, everybody. With me is my colleague Elizabeth Hisby, and I'm sure most of you who are these governor appointees, you've either talked to us on the phone, emailed, seen us in committees, or you'll be seeing us soon in a committee setting. Good morning to you all. Thank you, Secretary, very much for the not necessary remarks, but we really appreciate it. This truly is our largest agency that we deal with for boards and commissions. The governor appoints 190 boards throughout the state, and again, the majority are here in this agency. And as we indicated, about 1,500 people that we've appointed since we took office 3 years ago. And it's a great challenge, but it's something that we do definitely enjoy. We're continuing to look for help across all different areas, and we'll get on our soapbox here a little bit, just briefly. We won't take too much of your time. I want to speak to folks who are yet to go through the Senate confirmation process. For those of you who are still pending in that area, there's got to be several. I know on the Health Committee alone, I think there's over 40 appointments that are still pending. Right now, we're kind of racing against the clock because the State Senate will be adjourning around April 1st, and they will not be returning until 2015. And so usually work that we can do throughout a year gets scrunched down into just a few months this calendar year. And so we're really working as diligently as we can to get folks through the process, get them confirmed so that you can be off and running. That's not to say that we won't continue to do appointments throughout the year, but what will happen then is they will stack up, and then the legislature that comes in 2015, whoever that may be, will take up those appointments at that time. So for those of you who are still waiting to do your hearing, I just wanted to take a little bit of a brief glimpse for you to see what's still coming for you. We'll be calling upon you to come up to the state capitol, and a Senate hearing will be held for you and for your colleagues. And it's actually not intimidating like a C-SPAN thing you can see on television, or a big Capitol Hill hearing where there's 60 legislators all standing and looking down at you. For those of you who have gone through the process, you all know it's actually pretty painless. And most of the time, the legislators want to know more about you and your profession than they necessarily do about the board in which you're about to serve. For example, we just had a veterinarian that went through 45 minutes roughly of questioning. And that's not typical, but in that case, it wasn't because it was, oh, prove to us you're worthy of this appointment. It was more so, we're very curious about large animal science, trends in the ag industry, tell us more. And a lot of times, that's what the legislators want. They want to know more about your industries, what you bring to the table, and what trends are you seeing here. So usually they're very brief testimonies, but occasionally you have your 40-minute questioning. But again, it's nothing where they're going to be throwing bombs over the fence at you and trying to stump the teacher. So it's usually a pretty rewarding experience. So you go through a brief hearing, you testify before the committee, answer questions for them, and then once that is done, the full, your committee will actually vote on your appointment and give you the thumbs up. That gets kicked out to the full body. There's 33 senators in our state, and then they get an opportunity to all give a thumbs up or thumbs down on your appointment. And then once they give you the final blessing, you're off and running. And so think of it like this. The governor nominates you, and the Senate officially appoints you in your capacity. So for those of you who are still in that kind of in-between process, that's a little bit of what to expect. You'll be hearing from us very soon if you haven't already. What happens is they poll the senators to find out what their availability is for hearings. Once they all get their calendars in sync, we give you the notification. Because some of you are probably sitting in the seat saying, yeah, the notification was about maybe 4 days worth. Trust me, that's not because that's something that we want to do to you. That's more or less the senator saying, you need to appear, be here, sorry for the late notice. So usually we try to give you at least a week's notice, but that doesn't always work. It just all depends, again, when the Senate notifies us of that. So we try to give you every notice as possible. Now, if you are unable to be here in person at the Capitol for your hearing, and again, this is because of the time crunch we're in, by all means, if you can move heaven and earth and get on the phone and phone in, please do so. It's just, we don't have a lot of extra weeks to work with them leaving. So if it's such a thing where you're thinking, wow, I'm going to be in Texas on business, or I'm on a family vacation in Florida, and I couldn't blame you for that at this time. If you can pick up the phone and get away, the legislators try to get you on the phone right away at the beginning of the hearing. You say your words, and then you finish and you can go about your business for the day. So do us a favor, if you can, hop on the phone, and then we can get your hearing through it. Most of the senators are pretty lenient when it comes to being able to accommodate you in that regard. And also, in addition, we throw a little bit more homework at you, and that is to make sure that you're calling the senators, notifying them of your desire to be appointed, and then thanking them for their trust in you to do a great job and their vote of confidence in you. And so, as you know, that's usually the final step of the road for paperwork. As far as paperwork itself, as long as we're on that topic, oaths of office, if anybody is sitting in this room and you are a gubernatorial appointee and you have not signed an oath of office, please see one of us before we leave here today so we can make sure we get that taken care of. Everybody must sign an oath of office before they have their first meeting. If you have been participating in meetings without an oath of office signed, you actually vacate your seat by law, and then we actually have to reappoint you all over again. So it's very critical that that oath of office is signed for your first term, and if you're gracious enough to come back and give us a second term and serve the state, you do need to do another oath of office, and we always send those out in your packet. So please, please, please make sure that you have your oath of office completed. Other item is the statement of economic interest, which is required by state statute for all folks that have to go through the Senate confirmation process. Please make sure that you fill out your SEIs and have those completed within the 3-week deadline. If you have a hearing coming up, or at least you believe you'll be having a hearing coming up, the legislators like to have those in hand before you actually come to your hearing so that they can, if they have any questions, they can follow up with those. All of the boards here that are Senate confirmation required SEI. There's a couple of boards, like the Bradley Center Board or the Milwaukee Brewers Board, that do not require those by statute. So please make sure you get those completed. And we're not trying to badger you, we're just trying to make sure we're complying by state law and that we can keep the legislators happy. So Elizabeth is going to transition here a little bit, tell you a little bit about some future things for you.
Yeah, so if you're ever interested in being reappointed, we're just going to ask you to reapply just for our knowledge. To say if you have moved somewhere, your number has changed, it just helps us keep updated with where you are in your life. So for reapply, you can go onto our website, and we have a new online fillable one. Some of you may have filled that one out, or others of you may have filled out our Word document one. Either one is completely acceptable. And so from there, you will also be called to go through the Senate confirmation process, unfortunately. But depending on the committee chair's office, or committee chair, you may be able to just phone in since you had already appeared before them. That's up to them. So, and that's a little bit about reappointments. And then, should you resign in the future, for if you have come across some kind of point in your life where you need to resign, we're going to ask that in addition to contacting your board supervisor, that you contact us. And in order for your resignation to be fully effective, it has to be addressed to Governor Walker. So if it says, dear, Craig Gaspard, I hereby resign, unfortunately that is not acceptable and you're still in your seat. But as soon as you say, dear Governor Walker, then you have been effective in your resignation. A little bit note on term limits. You can have 2 consecutive terms, and then from there you must take a full term of a break before you can reapply. But I believe that's
just for your given board. If you're feeling like you'd like to serve in a different capacity, we'd love to have you, and we can transition you over to a different examining board for that purpose as well. I also want to echo the statements of the Secretary, and on behalf of Governor Walker, say thank you very much for what you're doing. We know that this is no easy task to be able to take the time that you do. Many of you drive several hours, but whether you drive 15 minutes or you drive 6 hours from Superior, we truly do appreciate your work, your time that you're giving, not only to the committee's process, dealing with us, getting the paperwork in, but most importantly, serving your peers and serving the citizens of our state, because these are very, very important boards, and we really appreciate it. On that, if we can step on the soapbox for one moment, we do have a big task in order of finding folks to be able to serve. And I think the most critical thing for us is finding public members to serve. It's usually not too hard to find professionals to serve in the capacity on these boards. But public members, citizen members to serve is a difficult thing for us to find. So if you know of anybody that would like to serve or is interested in serving, send them our way. We'd be happy to answer any questions. And also to kind of piggyback on that, once we leave you, it's kind of like graduation. All the kids go off and off they go, and we usually don't hear from you until it's time for reappointment. Don't be afraid to check in with us. We want to know how things are going on your boards. We'd love to hear about things. Obviously, if there are more things subject to the licensures and things like that, we want to make sure you're following with the folks here. But don't be afraid to call the governor's office and let us know how things are going, if there's any questions or concerns, or if the committee process, you're worried about something, give us a call and we'll be sure to help you out. So again, thank you so much for what you're doing. We'll keep it short today. I know you have a little bit of a long day ahead of you, but thanks for all you do. Appreciate it.
Anybody have any questions for Eric and Elizabeth? Hey, all right, take it easy. That's a good start. Well, thanks, guys. And like Eric said, if I could, echo, it is, how many times do we spend, days on the phone saying, hey, boy, we really need a public member for this board, or this board's down 2 public members. That is a really big thing. And it is really important to have that public member perspective on the board, just as a balanced kind of outside, outside perspective, kind of out of the box. So that's really important to have. And so as some of you do, transition off of boards, if you run into potentially the end of your career on end of your second term and you're moving off the board and you're interested in still serving, get these guys an application because there's a public member spot waiting for you somewhere, and we'd love to put you in one. Our next presenter, and I saw him walking around out here, is Lieutenant Slowy in here? Hey, he's right here. Okay. We wanted to get you a little bit of a primer on just building security basics, Capitol Police 101. These are the folks that help us secure our building and do what we need to do to make sure that when you're in a board meeting, it's a safe setting. So, Lieutenant Slowy, it's nice to meet you in person.
Thank you. I certainly didn't expect this big of a group today. So, anyways, just give a brief introduction of myself. My name is Bob Slowy, and this is year 28 of state service for me. I spent 20 years with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation. I worked as an agent, first-line supervisor, and then bureau director, where I supervised drug enforcement for a while, then financial crimes, and actually gambling enforcement. And actually, part of my term there, I did serve on the Wisconsin Controlled Substances Board, so I have sat on the board before. And then when I worked for the Wisconsin Division of Gaming, that's actually a state regulatory agency. So I have some experience with regulating as well. I've been with the Wisconsin Capitol Police Department for the last 2 years. I'm currently Lieutenant of Operations, so I supervise a patrol and a detective bureau. First, I want to take a couple minutes to talk about the Capitol Police Department because I think there's a lot of people that don't understand who we are or what we do. And then we'll talk a little bit about building security, and maybe some of the things that will affect you as a board member. First and foremost, Capitol Police Department, who are we and what do we do as far as our role, our mission, and so on. First and foremost, I believe that the reason that we're here for the Capitol Police Department is to, number one, we are here to ensure protect the integrity of state government. We're here to ensure the continuity of operations. We're here to protect you, make sure you, working for the state, can do your job. And so we have a number of programs that we do in order to accomplish that. We're also there to protect state employees, if that's from the newest part-time employee all the way up to the governor and to the state legislature. We provide dignitary protection for the governor, the first family, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and the legislature as well, so that they can operate. We're also here to protect the public when they're in state office space. And ultimately, we're also here to protect state assets. So how do we go about doing that? What are some of the resources and what do we do? Well, currently with the Capitol Police Department, we have statewide jurisdiction and we have 55 sworn police officers. Primary areas of responsibility are in Milwaukee and Madison state office settings. In Milwaukee, we have a sergeant and 6 police officers, and they, again, provide law enforcement services to the state office buildings in Milwaukee and Waukesha County. Here in Madison, I'm a lieutenant of operations, so I supervise a patrol division, which have about 3 sergeants and about 30 officers that protect we have roughly 60 state office buildings just here in Madison. And then I also supervise our detective unit, which we have I have a sergeant and 3 detectives that do criminal investigations. And so we provide law enforcement services here in Madison to those 60 state office buildings. And so we respond to calls for medical service, for criminal investigations, for parking, for accidents, or whatever it may be. And so we really provide those law enforcement services to those state office buildings, along with the state capitol, and also along with the governor's mansion. We provide 24 hours a day coverage out of the executive residence. And we also provide criminal, with our detective bureau, we do a variety of different things. We spend a lot of time doing threat investigations. And if it's the governor, the legislature, or other state employees. For some reason, people like to threaten the state government. And so we do a lot of investigations with that. We also do criminal investigations dealing with embezzlement, theft, whatever it may be. So what are some of the things and why am I here today? I think part of it also is the fact that one of our newest initiatives is we're trying to implement kind of a community policing model to the state and to the Capitol Police. And so basically what we're doing is for the state office buildings, particularly the DOA owned and operated buildings here in Madison, we're assigning a police officer to the building to kind of do outreach, to meet with people in the building, to see what the issues are, and to work together. One of the things that happens out there, with 60 state office buildings here, and probably 25,000 people, daily shift, we only have 2 or 3 officers on at a time. So we obviously can't be everywhere, and we can't do everything. One of the things that my chief of police teaches, he has an hour-and-a-half program on active shooter. He does a very good job of that for state employees, and so if you ever get an opportunity to attend that, that's outstanding training. And one of the things he talks about in that is the fact that we as police officers can't be everywhere. A lot of active shootings that have happened generally are done in 4 to 5 minutes, and there's just no way we're going to be there before this happens. And so we really need to form that good partnership so that people on the front lines, the people out there, are eyes and ears, and really form a partnership to work together. With our community policing, we're trying to work with everybody in the buildings, and particularly work with security in that buildings. The state office buildings are kind of all over the map. Some of them are wide open, public building. People walk in and can go anywhere and do anything. We're really trying to get away from that and implement some security levels. Security here in this building is relatively tight. She even made me sign it. Go through the process, which is good. And that's what we like to see. Through our community police, we want to try and get all the state office buildings to a certain level of security. Where there is, for the most part, the building is secure. There's one entrance for the public where they have to go through a receptionist, sign in, and then once they get into the space, they're with a state employee. Plus that generally too, that within the building there's going to be card readers, there's going to be alarms, we're going to know who has access, and we're also working with management to make sure they're all doing their due diligence. Not make sure you don't let the wrong people in to begin with, as far as doing good background investigations on the people you hire, cleaning crews, any vendors that are in there to make sure they should be there, and following good procedure once people get terminated as far as getting back keys, turning off access cards, and so on. We're also looking at, we want to get certain levels of video surveillance. I don't think there's any video cameras here in this building. And then also, another thing we have in a lot of buildings is duress alarms or panic buttons. And here in this building, we have them at the two front desk areas in the secretary's office. In some of the places where there's hearings, other office buildings where there's hearings, we do have panic buttons and duress buttons in there as well. So, the question really becomes, what can we do better to improve upon security? One of the biggest things is just basics. The basics are good situational awareness coupled with see something, say something. I think one of the things that we sometimes fail with is the fact that oftentimes people don't trust our own instincts. A lot of times we'll see things, we'll feel things, but we won't trust it. It's like, well, that was nothing, and we'll ignore it. And that's what we're asking you not to do. If something doesn't look right, it probably is not right. And just ask us to check out. One of the things we do at the Capitol Police, every day we do check people. We do check people where somebody thinks somebody's suspicious, someone doesn't look right, or an officer sees it themselves. And they go, just check on them, what are you doing, why are you here, they run their name. And many times it's not something, but oftentimes it is something. Or we regularly pick up people that have warrants, we regularly find people that have other problems that we have to deal with. So one of the things we're trying to do in the actual state office buildings is, and I'm not sure how well we're doing in this building here yet, initiative is that from the Secretary's office on down, trying to make sure when people are in the state office building, all state employees wear their state IDs, and that they monitor it, and that everybody that works there is responsible for what goes on, as far as we should all be monitoring each other, make sure people have their IDs and the right people are in the building. I don't know if that's being followed in this building at all yet, or okay. Yeah, some buildings are very, very good at it, and some are not so good at it. But that's just one level in which we can start to monitor and see what's going on and make sure that the right people are not getting into the buildings. We have things happen all the time. We just had one of the downtown buildings where actually it was happening in the downtown area where there was a ring of crooks that were just wandering the state office buildings. They'd wait till they find a door open and they'd steal a computer and leave. And it was happening in some of the downtown office buildings, happened in one of our downtown state office buildings. We ended up, that was a building, I thought they were getting pretty tight at looking at state IDs and monitoring it, and they had been, and they had cameras, but this guy just, someone went out a door and he went in, and he's wandering through the building, and later we end up with a suspect because the fact several people said, yeah, I saw this guy, and he looked kind of suspicious to me. And somebody else said, yeah, I saw this guy, it seemed a little weird, he was changing his clothes in the closet. I don't know why he was doing that. Why didn't you call us that? And it ended up, Madison Police Department arrested him for doing the same thing in a different building. We ended up doing some follow-up, and here it was the guy. And so just some good basic due diligence can make all the difference in the world. And then just extend that out as far as when you're working a state office building, and you're in a building, just monitor the surroundings. When you're coming and going, parking in the building, you should get to a point where you know what's going on, what is normal in that area, and if something isn't normal, call it in. Like I said, we do check persons, we do things every day. One of the things that, and we don't see it as much out here, but particularly downtown area, that we have to deal with the fact that right across the street from the Capitol, there is the homeless center, and there's 130 guys that stay there every night, and they get kicked out during the day every day, and they need someplace to go. And we have to deal with them every day. And with that, they're there for a reason. They either have substance abuse or mental health problems. And every day, if we find them intoxicated, take them to detox, we find them in state office buildings, they have warrants. It's something we have to deal with on a regular basis. And it's also something that can bleed into some of the boards that you're a part of. One of the things that we see is the fact that often, one of the main reasons we end up dealing with people often is the fact that they have mental health problems. They have bad days. We had one day last week where in the Capitol, we had 23 different committee meetings that the Senate Assembly was going on in the Capitol. And we had 3 different incidents where we had to go and arrest people, and they all had mental health problems. And they just showed up in a committee meeting, started yelling and screaming. We had to go arrest them. They were not at all reasonable or rational, and we had to lock them up. One of the issues we really struggle with in law enforcement is the fact that a lot of people we deal with have mental health problems, and unless they express a desire to hurt themselves or kill somebody else, you can't put them in for emergency detention. But there's a big gray area where people have problems that there's not many resources. And we're trying to partner up and get as many resources as we can, but those 130 homeless guys that stay across the street, they all have unique problems that we have to deal with. So how can this affect you as a board and a board member? Well, as a board and a regulatory board, a lot of times you deal with licensing, or when you deal with regulating a lot of people. Well, within that group, you too can deal with people who have mental health problems, who have issues. Oftentimes, it may not even be obvious, but one of the things you will find is the fact that there will be people in which you have to deal with who are not following the rules. And no matter what you try and do, they will not follow the rules. And most of you are in your position because you're reasonable people and you're used to dealing with things in a reasonable manner. And you may be trying to deal with a particular issue or a particular person in that manner, and it may be difficult for you to understand at first, why is this person not following the rules? Why are they not doing it? I don't know if it's all mental health or what you're going to say, but I do know that there are certain people that are not going to follow the rules, regardless of what you do. And so you eventually have to deal with them, revoke them, or whatever it may be. One of the things we see in the board meetings too is sometimes those same people show up for revocations or for hearings, and they're difficult human beings to deal with. We do on a regular and recurring basis, we just call it preserve the peace. When we get a call from a board member, administrative law judge, oftentimes from state agencies where someone's going to be terminated, and they say, here's someone we're concerned with that we have to deal with. Can you come and help us out with this? So we'll do it at different levels. Sometimes it'll be when you fire somebody, or in your case, a board member. We're dealing with a person, we've had a problem for a long time. They'll explain it to us, and we'll work together on it. What's the best way to do it? Sometimes we'll just have an officer in the area. Sometimes we'll have an officer in the building. Oftentimes we'll have an officer in the room. Just got an email from an administrative law judge yesterday. I think it's in reference to an employment issue, a guy that we deal with, we've had a lot of problems with. They have a 4-day hearing scheduled with him. They ask for an officer to be in the room for all 4 days. We will do that, and we will be there to help you in any way we can. And so my biggest point to you is the fact that, number one, if you have some concerns with somebody, pay attention to that. Let us know, and if at all possible, we'll send officers as best we can. And it's not, we too have limited resources, but there's times we've gone up to hearings in Fond du Lac and in Milwaukee and Green Bay. We'll find a way, we'll work with the local law enforcement to try and find a way to have an officer there to stand by to help you out. And so it's just, I think it's important for you to realize that there are times in which, if you're hearing from your investigators or from the people that are involved in your field that someone may be a problem, listen to that and don't be afraid to call us. And we can work together to try and provide you with as much security as we can. And I guess, and just in very, very quick terms too, one of the other things my chief always talks about, he gives the active shooter training, which is an hour-and-a-half long class. A lot of it boils down to run, hide, fight. The basic premise of that is if you're in a meeting, or if you're, again, situational awareness, where are you at? If something goes sideways, what are the escape routes? Where can you go? If there's an active shooter, can you run and safely get out the door? If you can't, is there a place to hide? announcement laid behind that. If you got nothing else and it comes through the door, don't just give up a flower. That's a whole nother discussion for another day, but I thought I'd just throw that out there for you. And to main thing is to work together, see something, say something, work together in building security. We can't do it alone. We need everybody out there watching what's going on. If you ever suspect something isn't right, just give us a call. We'll check on it. And if you have problems with somebody that you feel maybe a problem at a hearing, give us a call and we'll let you know. So, I think that's about the time. Any questions, comments, anything else we can talk about? I'm not sure, your hearings are probably all over the state in different places. I think some of the hearings are here. I don't think you have any arrest alarms or patch buttons in any of your hearing rooms. That's something we talk about and look at. Those are pretty cheap to put in, where you push that button and the camera's coming. Or to the setup some rooms where if it goes sideways, there's an escape route. Sometimes you also have protesters that show up at your hearings as well. If that's something you anticipate again, give us a call and we can work with you on that. So, any questions? Anything else that covered what you?
Any questions for Lieutenant Bob? Don't be shy. We got a couple minutes under budget here.
Yes.
If we're in a state office building like this today and someone calls 911, who responds?
Here in Dane County, 911 centers knows which ones are in the state office building, so we will respond and we will help. Absolutely. Plus, like I said, there's 3 arrest buttons in this building, so if they push that button, everybody's coming. And we have hundreds, probably thousands of arrest buttons throughout the state office buildings. We get those on a regular. We had one in the Capitol yesterday, and a lot of times it's accidental. She felt very embarrassed when 6 cops showed up in about 30 seconds. She got freaked out. That's what we do. We're glad to do that. So, okay, anything else? Matt?
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lieutenant
All right.
Bob. Can you hear me now? Is that better? It's back. Good deal. Should have got that for your presentation, Eric. Well, next, I failed to introduce myself. I'm glad Secretary Ross did that for me. I'm Greg Gasper, the Administrator of the Division of Policy Development and your Master of Ceremonies for today. I am, by the way, the picture that the Secretary was talking about, this is real life stuff. This is Joe Vosen, our agency auditor, and that is really a MedBoard screening panel packet before one of their monthly screening panel meetings. And they're by no means the only board that has to deal with stuff like that. You know, nursing has a similar workload. So thank you again for what you do. And we're here to help make your ride easier. But I want to talk to you about, and spend the next 20 minutes talking about just a real high-level, overview, hitting the finer points of being a board or council or committee member. And I'm going to use this remote control, and hopefully I'll do it right. As the secretary talked about, our division is broken down, or our agency is broken down into 5 divisions, headed up by the secretary's office, who provides overall policy and operational guidance to the department. Obviously, the boards, are semi-autonomous. You make the policy, we carry out the policy and direct staff to get the work done. We have 5 divisions. Some of which you'll be hearing from today, the Division of Professional Credential Processing. You'll be hearing from this afternoon. There's a division that I run, the Division of Policy Development. I'll get into the details in a couple minutes. The Division of Legal Services and Compliance, which handles all our disciplinary actions and any legal issues that we've got in the department. Our Division of Industry Services, if you serve on one of our trades advisory councils, you're working very closely with our DIS staff, who oversees state building codes in Wisconsin, who conduct building inspections, ensure compliance. And then there's our Division of Management Services, who are the administrative wing of our agency. I like to say you only have two responsibilities as a board member, as a board, council, or committee member. Obviously, there's a lot to each of them. Number one is to write administrative rules. So the legislature sets our parameters. They give us statutes. They pass bills. Governor signs them into law. They become statutes. Oftentimes, they'll give us, the department, or if you're an examining board with rulemaking authority, they'll give you the authority to fill in the blanks on those statutes to make them easier to do step two of your responsibilities, which is to implement the law and administer the law. Now, there's two ways that looks, how it looks to administer the law. Number one, the one that everybody here is most common with, in my division, policy development is most closely associated with, is the board meeting. You sit down in your board meeting context, you go through business, you go through credentialing decisions and disciplinary decisions that need to be made in accordance with the law, rulemaking, all those types of things. That's point A. Point B of how this looks is as a liaison or as a panel designated by the board. What is a liaison? A lot of you, if you've been around a while, you know that a lot of times you'll have, especially a credentialing liaison, essentially somebody who handles certain decisions on behalf of the board in between board meetings, or on behalf of the board overall. So with nursing, for example, the nursing board has a credentialing liaison who works closely with our staff on certain credentialing decisions, folks where there's clarification needed or questions, maybe a conviction in the background. The credentialing liaison will work closely with the department on that. Another one is the monitoring liaison, who will be help out our staff with monitoring folks who are on disciplinary orders or other kinds of orders. And the most common panel that we'll see is a screening panel. Now, we talked about that picture with Joe Boson standing next to the paper. The screening panel will, when somebody files a complaint with the department, the complaint will typically first go to a screening panel made up of a couple board members and a department staff. They'll make a determination whether or not whether to open the case for investigation and move forward, or to just close the case because there's no violation or maybe another reason. Those are the most common things you see. There's all sorts of other liaison or panel arrangements that you can see out there. Some boards you'll have a situation, generally if somebody wants to do a speaking engagement, go out and speak on behalf of the board at an event they've been invited to, we'll get a motion from the board to make that happen. Now, we talked about our general parameters and the statutes that the legislature has given us, and this is something we always have to be real careful to pay real close attention to. As a department, our general authority and our relationship with the boards is laid out in Chapter 440 of the Wisconsin statute. So if you're looking for some good bedtime reading tonight, that's a good one to get out. But it actually is a fairly easy read. It goes through the relationship of how boards are autonomous entities, the examining boards. Obviously, every board is a little bit different in its statutory composition, makeup, and authority. But it draws that line where you have your job and we have ours. The policymakers make the policy, they make the decisions, that's you, the boards, and then we, on the staff side, execute your directives and direct the staff in a way that gets that done in an efficient way. That's what Chapter 440 is all about. Chapter 227 is important to us too. That's the general chapter in terms of making administrative rules, which is, like I said, a big part of what we do, a big part of what you do. And one of the things in there that I wanted to make sure to touch on today was, and I summarized here, each statement of general policy should be promulgated as an administrative rule. So if your board has a rulemaking authority or the department, we have to be real careful that what we do on a day-to-day basis, what we tell people, is in line with the statutes and with the code, that it's tied to the law, and that we're letting the law speak for itself. Executive Order 50 that Governor Walker signed a couple years ago speaks to this as well. Talks specifically about reinforcing Chapter 227 and how rulemaking really needs to adhere to state statutes and really limits policy guidance by our agency and by boards. We call it policy guidance. We get a lot of questions in terms of policy guidance from folks. What we call the dreaded practice question. Hey, department, or hey, board member, is it legal for me to do this? Can you give me an interpretation on such and such? We have to be real careful with those. We have to be careful to stick within our statutory parameters that the legislature has given us. We can't give legal advice. We can't give legal advice. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. Folks have to be able to, if they need an interpretation, we carry out the law. We don't interpret the law. But in such situations, maybe that contact is revealing something that we need to address in the rule. Maybe the law is not clear. And one of our big policy pushes as a department that we want to make, and some of you who have been around a while have seen this on your boards, that we want to try to clarify these situations. If there's something that's ambiguous, let's get into the rules and let's clean it up, and just make it easier for folks who aren't used to reading the law every day to get what's going on. As a general rule of thumb in this situation, unless the law is explicit, we typically don't have the authority to give policy guidance, to say when somebody says, hey, can I do this? Saying yes you can or no you can't. We have to be real careful. Moving on, and a lot of this is self-evident, but I wouldn't put it up here if it wasn't an issue from time to time. Just general conduct as a board member. You're going to be seeing that, the number one, they're all number one technically. Maybe you got 1A, B, C, and D here, but number one would be respect confidentiality, especially if you're on a board with credentialing authority and disciplinary authority. You're going to be doing a lot of things in closed session that need to stay in closed session. And when you come out of that room, what you talked about has to stay in that room. Complying with open meetings laws. You don't want to compromise a decision that you've made by going into the bathroom with 3 other board members and having a conversation that's outside the scope of the law. It can really put you in a legal tight spot. Mike Burnt, our general counsel, is going to be talking about that later this morning. Also, obeying ethics laws in Wisconsin's ethics standards and the Government Accountability Board. Tom Ryan from our division is going to be giving you a presentation on that in about 10-15 minutes. And then finally, be objective. You're going to be coming across a lot of different situations that you're probably going to want to just take a step back from, take a look at the big picture, and set aside any biases that you maybe built in throughout the years, and just maybe think outside the box, but be objective. Now, what does the meeting look like? A few points that I wanted to touch on here. Depending on what board you're on, every board is a little bit different in its meeting schedule. For the med board and the nursing board, they meet every single month generally. Maybe there's one month that they don't meet. Some of our code advisory councils, like the Uniform Dwelling Code Council, is going through a process and a report right now, so they're meeting every month. Other boards and councils and committees, you'll see maybe 4 times a year, 6 times a year, quarterly, or maybe just once a year. It just depends. Attendance is paramount. We really need you at those meetings, and if you can't make it, please tell us ahead of time. Actually, if you can make it, please tell us ahead of time too. Often our bureau assistants will do a quorum check. We really need you engaged on the quorum check. We don't want to drag you down to Madison from Superior or Wausau, or if there isn't going to be a meeting. We respect your time, and we also want to respect the folks who have business before the board. A lot of credentialing decisions and disciplinary decisions positions. Folks' lives are hinging on what we do here, so it's important to have you engaged so we can have a quorum, which is generally 50% plus one, or there's other, depending on the board, there might be some statutory quorum criteria out there too. We need you to be prepared. And that goes for us too as a department. We need to have our act together so we can advise you and answer your questions as a board member and empower you to do your difficult job. So please go through your agenda packet, a couple days beforehand, study it. Especially with board chairs, we have some deadlines to get agendas noticed in time and get out all our business noticed and out to the public. So please respect those agenda deadlines. And then the fifth one goes without saying again, but I wouldn't put it up there if it wasn't an issue from time to time. Decorum is always a problem. Not always a problem, sometimes a problem. Just respect your peers, and that'll go well with you and us. Now, who are the folks you're going to be running into day to day as you do this job? Other board members, obviously. There might be some stakeholders that you're going to run into that you've never met before. Maybe folks from a trade association, lobbyists. Definitely the legislature. They shape everything that we do here. I mean, they're one of our, what we consider just about our top stakeholder. And somebody that, that has great power to shape what we do. And then other department staff, obviously, throughout the agency. And speaking of those staff, just wanted to get into some detail about what you're going to see from my division, the Division of Policy Development. We do four basic things. The fourth I didn't put up here. Board and council operations, operating the day-to-day mechanics of your board, communicating with you and board chairs, and rulemaking, like I talked about. And then we also have an Office of Exams and Education that oversees exam and education, continuing ed, and pre-licensure requirements. And we also operate a prescription drug monitoring program in tandem with the Pharmacy Examining Board out of my division. But there's going to be two main folks you're going to see from my division on a regular basis. An executive director and a bureau assistant. Your executive director is really your go-to person. So like the Tom Ryans, the Jeff Wigans, and Brittany Lewins, Dan Williams, these folks are your go-to, your operational liaison to the department on any non-disciplinary issue. So any question that you have, the executive director is your first call. They also are the facilitator of the board meetings. They'll work in partnership with the board chair to make sure that your board meeting runs smoothly and to ensure that all the business gets done that needs to get done. And they can be a situation analyst for you, somebody to help you troubleshoot, somebody to bounce ideas off of, and just generally be kind of a cool head for you to bounce things off. You'll also see a bureau assistant sitting at a table just like this. And they're really the administrative glue that keeps our board operations running. They compile the meeting agendas ahead of time and work with our executive directors to get them out to board chairs and get them approved. They'll record motions at the meetings, draft minutes. They'll handle lunch and hotel arrangements before the meeting. And then they'll do a lot of, I think I saw Dan and Matt Guidry walking around in Yelena with some mileage and per diem forms, some reimbursement forms earlier today. They'll also handle that paperwork for you as well. You also see a rules coordinator from time to time, but I'm going to let Jeff Wigan get into that later on this morning. I won't get into that now. But that is kind of the overall high-level, hey, this is generally what you do and what you can expect. There's going to be a lot of blanks filled in today, but I'm happy to take any questions. I'm 4 minutes under budget here. I'm particularly looking forward to our next presentation. It has a little blast from the past, a little treat at the end of it.
Right, you do it, it's going to be 5 minutes.
So Jeff's going to tell you about the world of making law, adopting administrative rules and state statutes. So definitely pertinent to what we're doing here. So I'll let Jeff take it from here.
All right, thank you, Greg. Can everybody hear me? Too loud? Too quiet? I don't think actually, I'm not too afraid of being too loud. I'm just afraid of being too short for those of you that sit in the back. I'm not very tall. So now that Tom Ryan officially scared the living daylights out of you guys with his ethics presentation, I'm going to talk to you guys about how to write administrative rules. Just really briefly about myself, probably for most of you, with a couple exceptions here, you will never see me in a boardroom or a council room. But you will see some of the staff that I supervise. I supervise the administrative rules coordinators that you guys work with on a regular basis. And so today I'm going to walk you guys through how we as rules coordinators and how you guys as board and council members go about adopting administrative rules. I'm also going to touch briefly on how state statutes get adopted. You guys obviously, for the most part, won't really be a part of that process, but it's something that you guys need to be aware of in your capacity here. So without further ado, let's get started. First thing I wanted to show you guys is that it's complicated. Depending on the rule that you guys are working on, there's between 30 and 40 different steps. And I don't expect any one of you guys to know and memorize every single step. That's our job. That's what we do. That's the service that we provide to you guys. And so I'm just going to touch on what I think are the most important steps in the rulemaking process that you guys would be involved in. And please, if I'm confusing or if I'm using terminology that doesn't make sense to you, please just let me know. Ask any questions that you have. Okay, to start things off, I want to make you guys aware of, and I think most of you guys probably should already be aware of this, but Executive Order 61. Executive Order 61 has been handed down to us as a state agency and to you guys as board and council members from the governor. And what it basically does is it directs us to work with the Small Business Regulatory Review Board and to identify rules and regulations that may be potentially burdensome on small businesses or economic development and job creation in the state. And I wanted to bring this to you guys' attention if you're not already aware of it, because you guys need to know that when you guys write a rule, there's different steps in the process where other people get to review the rule that you guys had a hand in creating. And this is basically the lens that they are going to be reviewing it through. And we'll get into these steps later on in my presentation, but when your rule is reviewed, for example, by the governor's office or by the legislature, this is kind of what they're looking for. They're going to look and see the rule. Hey, does this rule make sense? Is it easy to read? Is it burdensome on small business, or does it make small businesses does it make the burden actually a little bit less burdensome? So this is the lens that you guys probably just kind of need to have in the back of your mind as you're going through and you're working on administrative rules. Just some basics. I learned early on in this job that I can't assume anything, especially when you talk about legislation and administrative rules. So I want to very briefly go over a couple things. A rule is something that an agency or an examining board can write. It can only be written when, as Greg mentioned before, that when the statutes explicitly say that we have the authority to write it. A statute is something that the legislature writes and the governor signs. So a statute trumps rule. We cannot have a rule that's in violation of or in conflict with a statute. So those are just some basics I want you guys to have that as an understanding. And as Greg mentioned before, we always have to have statutory authority for the rules that we write. That statutory authority is going to come from somewhere either in Chapter 440 or anywhere between 440 and Chapter 480, depending on the examining board or council that you work on. All of the rule writing steps that we have to abide by are laid out in Chapter 227 and Executive Order 50. They're very prescriptive and they need to be followed to a T. And I want to give you guys just one quick example and reason why. A number of years ago, there was a state agency, I won't mention the agency by name, but they spent a number of years working on a very significant administrative rule. They put that rule in place and they followed every single step in the process except one step. They missed it. And there was a stakeholder who had an issue with the rule, challenged it in court, and the judge threw the rule out, not on the merits of the rule, but because that state agency didn't follow every single step that's laid out in Chapter 227. So it is imperative that we follow every single step that's laid out. And again, that's not on you guys, that's on us. But I bring that up because I want you guys to be aware of it. And when a rules coordinator goes in front of your board or council and says, hey, we need your signature for this, or we need your motion that does this, it's for a very specific reason. And if we don't get it, we could be in violation of Chapter 227. So I just want you guys to be aware of that. Altogether, some of you guys may know this already, but altogether, the process can take anywhere between 1 and 2 years. And some of you guys, that may be very frustrating. And to be completely honest, sometimes it's frustrating for me too, because say it's something that's very non-controversial, it's just a very, a very simple rule change that you want to make, it still takes 1 to 2 years from start to finish. And the process is laid out that way very intentionally. What we do here at this agency and in this building affects people outside of this building. And the process is set up in such a way that those people outside of this building need to be aware of the changes, they need to be aware of opportunities to comment on those changes. So that's why the process is intentionally that long. So without further ado, let's go through some of the steps, the major steps in the rule writing process. So the first thing that you guys as an examining board or a council would work on would be writing a scope statement. The scope statement is a very broad generalization of the work that you guys want to initiate. It's a signal or a signification to people in the outside world that this state agency or this examining board is about to pursue a rule change on any given topic. Excuse me. It's important that when we write scope statements that we don't get too specific, because when we write a scope statement, it's like I said, it's just a very broad generalization of what we're going to do. We're not going to get into every single detail of what our rule is going to do, because maybe you guys don't even know at this point in time. You just want to start pursuing this process. So this is the first thing that we do. After you guys write a scope statement, or we write a scope statement with you guys, we send it to the governor for his approval. After we get the governor's approval, then we can start start the rulemaking process. It's very important that you guys as board and council members know that we as a state agency and you guys as a board cannot begin writing administrative rules until we get that scope statement back from the governor's office. Chapter 227 is very explicit in saying that no state agency employee or board or council member can write an administrative rule until we get that scope statement. It's very, very prescriptive. So it's important you guys know that. So after you got the scope statement back from the governor, the next thing you do is you figure out what the rule should be. You sit down as a board or council and you talk about it. This may take 1 meeting, it may take 20 meetings. It all depends on what the rule is and how complicated it is and who it affects and who it doesn't affect. You're maybe going to work with associations. You're maybe going to work with other stakeholders that are affected by the rule. Maybe you're going to have someone come into your meeting and talk to you about the rule. It's really your prerogative to take as much time or as little time as you want. It's really up to you guys how long this takes. Like I said, it can be 1 meeting. It can be 20 meetings, depending on how complicated the rule is. This is probably what takes the most time in the rulemaking process, is you guys sitting around the table and formulating what do we want this rule to say. All right. So after you got the scope statement, after you formulated what the rule is going to say, the next thing that you guys will do, and we will help you with, is we will do an economic impact analysis on the rule. The purpose of this is to just gather and to try to get an understanding of the effect that this proposed rule is going to have on people outside of this building. So we are going to solicit input from individuals, from businesses, from local units of government, from anybody that has an effect, that may be affected by the rule. And usually what this looks like is, basically us relying on you guys to help us with that. We, in our department, have some very knowledgeable and very professional staff that work with you guys on these projects. However, we don't know everything about the profession that maybe we're writing a rule on. For example, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a carpenter, I'm not an electrician, I'm not a plumber, but you guys are. And so if a rule is going to have an economic impact, we're really going to have to rely on your expertise to notify us and tell us of that. Maybe there's something you guys missed. So what we also do is we post that rule on our department website. And depending on what we kind of think, we have to post it for different time periods. So if we think the rule has a no to minimal economic impact, then we post it on our department website for 14 days. And what that allows is just allows people in the outside world to notify us, hey, this rule has an economic impact on me, I want you guys to be aware of it. And it's just kind of a notification and an opportunity for people to solicit and give their feedback to us. If the rule has a moderate economic impact, we post it for 30 days. And if the rule has a significant economic impact, then we will post that on our department website for 60 days. And again, that just allows people to provide input back to us. All right, so you got your scope statement. You developed the rule, you did your economic impact analysis. And that's just a reiteration of what I already said. Then the next thing we do is we kind of do two different steps at the same time. We will both notice the rule for a public hearing. We will also send the rule to what's called the Legislative Clearinghouse. The Legislative Clearinghouse is going to do a legal analysis of your rule. They are going to check and make sure that we as an agency or you as an examining board have statutory authority for that rule. Because as you know, you can't write a rule that's in conflict with statute. And you can't write a rule that you don't have the explicit authority to write. So that's what the Legislative Clearinghouse is going to check for. They're also going to make sure that it's written in the correct, what I call legalese. And again, this is not something that we would expect any of you guys, unless maybe you're an attorney, to understand. That's what we help you for, and that's the service that we provide to you. They're also going to just be checking the rule for spelling, grammatical errors, things like that. So after the Legislative Clearinghouse, we'll usually hold a public hearing at this agency. And it's just a time for the public to once again provide input on the rule. Usually it'll be held in conjunction with a regularly scheduled board or council meeting, so you guys don't have to make 2 trips down here. But anybody can come in and speak to the rule. It's just an opportunity, once again, for people to provide comment. It's not a debate time. It's not a time for us as staff or you guys as board or council members to argue your points. It's just, all it is purely a time to receive input. So, actually, let me go back to that. After the public hearing, you can make any changes that you may want to make. Maybe you didn't think of an issue that a member of the public raised to you. You can then change that rule. You can incorporate any changes that you want. And the next step that you do is you send it to the governor. And if you remember Executive Order 61, this is exactly what I said. When the governor receives your rule that you've worked maybe 6 to 8 months on, he's going to be reviewing your rule in light of Executive Order 61. He's going to be thinking, okay, does this rule that the Psychology Examining Board that they just wrote, does that fall in line with Executive Order 61? Is it more burdensome on small business? If it is, then the governor might have some issues with it. Then he might ask you guys as a board or us as an agency to maybe work on the rule and maybe adjust it. In all of my time being here, which hasn't been that long, but in all of my time being here, that doesn't usually happen because you guys usually are very good at writing rules that are common sense rules that everyone just kind of agrees with. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So anyways, so the governor gets a chance to review your rule. And then after that, after you get written approval from the governor, the next thing you do is you send the rule to the legislature. And the legislature gets a period of time to review your rule. It consists of 2 parts. The first part is your rule will go to what's called a legislative standing committee. Now, let me just take a brief second to explain that. A standing committee is usually broken up into topic areas. So if you're writing a rule on the nursing board, most likely that rule is going to go to the Senate and Assembly health committees because it's a health-related rule. If you're working on our dwelling code council and you're writing a rule on 1 and 2 family dwelling code regulations, that's most likely going to go to the Senate and Assembly housing committee. So they try to send our rules that we work on to a committee that has some kind of knowledge or expertise in our given area that we just wrote the rule on. That standing committee has a period of 30 days, and they have what's called a passive review. So They don't have to take any action on it, but they can. They can hold public hearings on the rule. They can solicit input from stakeholders, from associations, and hopefully they don't have any objections, and then they just let it gracefully slide right through their 30-day period. If they do have some objections, they can object to our rule, at which point then we have to come back, change the rule, hopefully to get them on board with it, and then we submit it back to them for their review again. But let's assume it's a good rule. You guys did your outreach with stakeholders. You made some changes after public hearing. There's no issues with the rule. So it sails through the first committee. The next hurdle is what we call the Joint Committee for Review of Administrative Rules. They also have a 30-day passive review. And once again, they can hold public hearings on the rule. They can object to the rule if they want. But usually most of the time they let it go through because, once again, we've done our due diligence. We've worked with our stakeholders. We've formulated a good rule that no one can object to. So after that, we adopt the rule. And basically that just means that our secretary or your board chair signs off on the rule, and then it becomes effective. And like I said at the beginning, all told, this process can take anywhere between 1 and 2 years, sometimes even longer. I've heard of rules going on for actually 5 or more years, depending on what the project is. So that is the administrative rulemaking process. Now, I want to give you guys a very brief understanding of how the legislature goes about their process in creating statutes. And for this, we have a very entertaining video to watch. How many of you guys, by raise of hand, are familiar with Schoolhouse Rock? Okay, yeah, most of you guys are good. Well, this is kind of a cheesy, but I think it's actually kind of a good tutorial on how a bill becomes law. Now, this setting that's in the video is actually for Congress, for those representatives that we elect to the federal government. But the process that they go about writing a law is the exact same process that we have here in Wisconsin. So without further ado, we'll watch this 3-minute clip.
Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." And he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I'm still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be, oh, how I hope
a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill. He signed your bill, now you're a law. Oh, yes!
All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. But that process, as you guys all, I'm sure you're aware, that was the process that happens at the federal level. But the exact same process happens here. So we have two houses of the legislature. You have the Senate and you have the Assembly. If a bill gets introduced in one of those houses, it has to pass both houses before it will go to the governor and be signed into law. So that's just a very, very broad overview of it, just so you guys have a basic understanding of that process. Now, I want to kind of go over you guys some frequently asked questions that we get from time to time when it comes to rules and statutes, especially legislation. One of the questions that we often get from council and board members is, will we notify you guys of legislation that affects your board or your profession? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. This is something that maybe we haven't always done the best job of in the past, but we are working on it. And typically what this will mean is that the executive director will reach out to either the board chair or the board legislative liaison and just give them a heads up about the bill. Maybe it's a bill that changes the makeup or membership of your board. Well, you guys should be aware of that. So what we'll do is we'll notify you guys of that bill, just so you guys have an understanding and you're aware of it. I do want to say that typically our involvement with that is probably going to end right then and there. Our job is really to notify you guys of legislation, and from that point on, we're going to kind of stay out of the process. And let me explain a little bit more, because I see some questions on some people's faces. We, as an agency, take our responsibility very seriously, but we also understand and respect the differing authority and powers that state government has. So we are what's called an administrative agency. We are not a legislative agency. That's the legislature. So we respect our authority and our responsibility to administer. We're really not in a place to advocate one way or another for legislation or for policy. That's something that you guys as a board or a council can consider kind of independent of us. But really our job is really just to kind of notify you guys of those potential legislative changes, and then you guys can kind of take it from there if you see fit. So kind of to piggyback off that, if you guys are aware of a piece of legislation, or maybe you're aware of a legislative issue that you guys as a board or council want to initiate, another question is, well, will we help you in that process? And again, it kind of goes back to the same point. We're an administrative agency, we're not a legislative agency, and we respect that authority that the legislature has and the governor have on those issues. So we generally are going to kind of stay out of that process. But some other opportunities and things that you guys can do as a board or council are, work with your professional associations. If there's a statutory change that you guys want to initiate, by all means, you guys as a council or individual board members can initiate that with an association. You can make individual contacts with your legislators as board members. The one thing I would caution you guys on the last point, if you guys want to reach out to legislators, just make sure that if you do it in your official capacity as a board member, that you get board sign-off for that. Say you want to approach your legislator from your hometown on an issue that you guys have been dealing with as a board, just make sure that your board's aware of that and they've given you that approval to make that contact. So, that's all I have. Questions? Yes?
Could you give an example of a rule that had significant economic impact that had to go through the 60-day notice?
Yeah, so the question, in case anyone didn't hear it, give an example of a rule that had to go through that had a significant economic impact that had to go through the 60-day notice. Since I've been here, there have been 0 rules that have what we would consider a significant economic impact. So I personally have not seen that. I think there are some other agencies, particularly the DNR, that do a lot of regulation of air and water quality. Those rules in particular have significant economic impacts. So what we generally work on, we'll make some tweaks to some licensure requirements, or maybe we'll make some tweaks to some building codes. Generally speaking, those don't have that significant of an economic impact on small businesses. That's the key, and I'm glad that you brought this up, because that's the lens that we look at it through, because that's what we're told to do. If it has an economic impact on an individual, well, that's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for, does it have an economic impact on small business? So that's a good clarification that I probably should have brought up previously, but I'm glad you asked that question.
Go back to the previous slide, and actually another one before. My question has to do is, yeah,
This one?
yes. No, the next one. After that. When you've got that note on your get board approval for talking legislatures, and this has to do with public hearings also. At what point in time are we a board member? At what point in time are we a citizen? And how is that in there? Because if I go to a legislator and I have a conversation with him or her, and I make it abundantly clear that I'm sitting there talking to them as an individual and I'm not representing the board, even though I'm disclosing it to them on it. The same with the public hearing. Am I allowed as an individual to testify at a public hearing?
So just if I could recap the question so everyone can hear it. How do you distinguish between working as a board member and an individual citizen if you want to pursue a legislative or rule change? You absolutely have the authority as an individual citizen to do whatever you please. But if you are going to be going before a legislator and talking to a legislator or testifying at a public hearing on behalf of the board, that's when you need the board approval or sign off. But if you want to go as individually as yourself and say, look, I'm not here speaking on behalf of the board, I'm here speaking on behalf of myself, by all means, please do that. And don't be discouraged from doing that. Please do that. But it's only when you're speaking on behalf of the board that you would need to get
So
signed
that
off.
also applies to public hearings?
Absolutely. Yes.
During the legislative review, is the board represented at those committee meetings?
Typically, no. A lot of times they don't even have hearings. It's like I said, it's kind of like a passive review. And the committee that your rule will go to, a lot of times they don't even hold hearings on them. If there are going to be a hearing on it, we'll certainly notify you guys, and then you guys can make that decision as a board or council to maybe send someone or send a group of people to go up. That has happened, but typically there's not even a hearing that takes place because it's a passive review. They can only hold a hearing if they want to. Good question.
This goes a few slides back, but it has to do with the manner in which boards or councils conduct public hearings. And you had a bullet point that talked about it's not a time for debate. And I guess I'm curious if there's a specific reason why at public hearings around board business, there's not the opportunity to ask questions of the person that is addressing the board, those types of things. It's so much different than the public hearings we typically would see on a C-SPAN or Wisconsin Eye. Is there a reason why the boards encourage not to ask questions of the people that are talking?
Okay, so with regard to the public hearing, and it's not a time for debate, let me clarify. Ask as many questions as you want, and don't leave that place until every single question you have has been asked. I guess I say it's not a time for debate because it's just not. You know, the public didn't come to debate. They came to give you input. But if you have clarifying questions that you want to ask, please ask. I don't mean to discourage you guys from asking questions or getting clarification from an individual that comes to testify. I guess I just point that out because, again, we just want to be respectful to the people that maybe drove down here from who knows where, and they made a special point out of their day to come down and provide you as a board or council member with their input. And there certainly is a time and a place to respond to their concerns, just not at that point. But please ask questions. Please ask questions.
Does law determine, and I probably should know this, if it's an advisory committee or an examining board?
Yes. The question is, what's the difference between an advisory committee and an examining board? So an examining board is a board that has statutory authority to write rules. An advisory committee is a committee that just advises either an examining board or the department on what those rules should be. But ultimately, it's the department or the examining board's authority on what to do. So that is a really good distinction to make. There's advisory committees and examining boards, and they do have different statutory authority. That's a great question.
So even if the act determines that there should be an examining board and one hasn't been implemented yet, is that something that's like a future thing, or?
There shouldn't be any examining boards that haven't been implemented. All of our, any statute that lays out any examining board should be actively working and happening, unless you're aware of one that we're not.
I'm just curious with Act 90 and the barber examining board, if there's just an advisory committee at this time.
Right. The statute doesn't lay out an examining board for barbers. When the legislature split the cosmetology and barbering profession into two different professions, they gave the licensing authority to the department. So we work with an advisory committee of barbers, as opposed to the cosmetology examining board. They have their own examining board. So that's just the way that the statutes were written.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. I particularly enjoyed that video. It took me 30 years since I saw it.